refrain from posting anything in the chat box during these sessions. Thank you. Kindly wait for a few more minutes.
Debobroto, Professor Fraser has already joined. So will you please make the announcement?
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon again to everyone. And we are extremely elated to find you all again in this virtual platform today. And we sincerely acknowledge your kind presence. Our today's webinar titled Rabindranath Tagore, The Legend and the Legacy, which is the third of the series of lectures organized by Vidyasagar University for celebrating 75 years of Indian independence, Swatantrata Ka Amrit Mahotsav, will start shortly. And in our today's webinar, we already have with us Professor Bashabi Fraser, CBE, as a distinguished speaker. Our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Sir, Professor Sibaji Pratim has already joined. So, good afternoon to everyone present on this virtual platform on the occasion of the third of the series of lectures organized by Vidyasagar University for celebrating 75 years of Indian independence, Swatantrata Ka Amrit Mahotsav. And in this inaugural session, I invite Professor Madhu Mangal Pal, convener, webinar subcommittee for the celebration of 75 years of Indian independence, and Professor, Department of Mathematics, Vidyasagar University, to deliver the welcome address. So,
Professor Pal cannot be heard.
He is muted.
It's echoing.
Kindly bear with us. There is a technical glitch. Professor Pal will join us very shortly. And in this note, I'd like to remind you.
I joined, sorry.
It's audible,
Sure,
sir.
it's fine. May I now request Professor Mudhumangal Pal, the respected convener of webinar committee for the celebration of 75 years of Indian independence, Professor Department of Mathematics, Vidyasagar University, to deliver the welcome address. So,
So, good afternoon to all of you. Honorable Inaugurator and keynote speaker, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, the Vice-Chancellor of Vidyasagar University. Honorable Speaker, Professor Bashabi Fraser, Dean Faculty of Science, Professor Satyajit Shah, Dean Faculty of Arts and Commerce, Professor T.K. D, Professor Ujjan Bhattacharjee, Chairman of Seminar and Webinar Committee of our university, Dr. Jolly Das, the coordinator of this program, today's program, our faculty members, officers, non-teaching staff, dear students, press personals, and other respected dignitaries. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the today's webinar, Rabindranath Tagore, the Legend and Legacy. Our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, is also working on Tagore, and he will give a keynote lecture on the topic. So we are very proud for this event. The Seminar Webinar Committee is very grateful to our Honorable Vice-Chancellor Sir for his constant inspiration and active cooperation have helped us to organize this series of webinar and seminar to celebrate our beloved country. We are grateful to him and thankful to him. Also, our two deans and also register are present here. Perhaps register is busy with other work. In spite of their busy schedule, thanks to them. This program is a part of celebration of 75 years of our independence due to the leadership of our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Basu. Professor Bashabi Fraser is an eminent researcher from CBE. She is a great or eminent professor of English and creative writing, Edinburgh, Napier University, Scotland. She did a lot of works in different areas, among them the Tagore is her passion. We are very happy and feel proud that she is with us. We actually note there that every Bengali knows the Tagore and think he is as a god of our Bengali language, literature, song, drama, etc. So we have some little bit idea about his work. Students and faculty from Bengali and English departments, along with other department, have more idea about our Gurudev, the Tagore. Even then, from today's lecture, we'll learn something new or something more. This is our hope from our speaker, Honorable Speaker. Hope this webinar will enrich you all and will be successful with the cooperation of all stakeholders of the university and other dignitaries who are presented here. I thank all of you. And Devabrata?
sir, Thank you very much, sir.
So I request our Vice Chancellor to give a inaugural lecture. Sir.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Pal, Professor Topon Kumar De, Dean of Arts and Commerce, Professor Satyajit Saha, Dean of Science, Dr. Bashabi Fraser, Commander of British Empire, Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing and Director, Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies, Edinburgh, Napier University, United Kingdom, Professor Indranil Acharya, Chairperson of the webinar, Professor Ujjayan Bhattacharya, Chairperson, Webinar Subcommittee of the Celebration of 75 Years of Indian Independence, Professor Pal, the convener of Webinar Subcommittee of the same Celebration Committee, my dear fellow colleagues in the department, colleagues from other departments, colleagues from other institutions, research scholars, and my dear students. At the outset, I would like to welcome Dr. Bashabi Fraser, a very, very well-known author, poet, and academic from Scotland, to this webinar on Rabindranath Tagore, the legend and the legacy. Thank you, Dr. Fraser. I would also like to express heartfelt thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate in the webinar and to deliver the inaugural address before inaugurating it. Well, although it is not customary to give a long lecture before a special lecture when Dr. Bashabi, a speaker like Dr. Bashabi Fraser will speak, and I am like everyone, I am also here very eager to listen to her. But I accept the invitation and would try to share some of my thoughts on Tagore's internationalism, its dilemma and dismay about the Western civilization, especially in his last days. So, world beyond nationalistic chauvinism, was Tagore's internationalist ideal of the mature years. In a bunch of letters to his friend C.F. Andrews in 1920, he wrote his mind in this regard, and I quote, "Shantiniketan must be saved from the whirlwind of our dusty politics, because I see more clearly every day what is the meaning of Shantiniketan. The West and the East are to meet in the coming age, and there must be seats made for such meeting. Let Shantiniketan send her call through me for this union of spirit." Thus, Shantiniketan, a remote part of the East, was to act as the place of union between the East and the West. In another letter to Andrews again, he said, "Shantiniketan is there for giving expression to the prayer of the eternal man, Asato Ma Asat Gamaya, the prayer that will ring clearer as the ages roll on, even when geographical world to realize that true patriotism is for the spiritual kingdom rather than for any crumb of favor thrown to her from her terrible political masters." Notwithstanding his love and respect for the Western civilization, at many times he felt uncomfortable in the voluminous reaches of the mechanical West. And I quote, "Civilization in the West is a magnifying glass. Its buildings, business, amusements are exaggerations." He continued, "Yesterday, some Shantiniketan photographs," and Tagore was writing it from, all these letters from 1920 when he was in America, in United States of America, when Gandhiji's non-cooperation movement just flagged off. "Yesterday," and I quote again, he continued, "Yesterday some Shantiniketan photographs came by chance into my hands. I say to myself, This is our Shantiniketan. It is ours because it has not been manufactured by the machine. This Sahara, that is the desert, this Sahara is mightily big, but my mind turns its back upon it and sinks. And here he quotes from W.B. Yeats's famous poem, Isle of Innisfree, Isle of Innisfree. And he says, I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 bin rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and leave the bee loud glade. Live in the bee loud glade. In the modern, and again I am quoting from Tagore, in the modern age, with all the facilities of communication, the access to the Innisfree has become most difficult. Central Africa has opened its secret to the inquisitive man, and also the North and the South poles. But the road to Innisfree is eternal mystery. Yet, I belong to that Isle of Innisfree. Its true name is Shantiniketan. Thus, the concept of Shantiniketan as a replica of the cosmopolitan human world, or Vishwa, turned to be a utopia even for the poet. Yet, it was a utopia worth enough to strive for. Tagore knew he was not alone to share this utopia. Many Western visionaries, for example, like Romarola, were with him. He knew that good sense would ultimately prevail in the presently misled West. He concluded his long polemical essay with Gandhi, The Call of Truth, it ended with a ray of hope, ray of optimism derived from an Upanishadic hymn. But the hymns of Upanishads could not give enough solace to Tagore at the fag end of his life. Crisis in Civilization, written 3 months before his death, can be considered as the last testament of the poet, which has a tragic tone that saddens our hearts. The article itself is about a tragedy, the profound tragedy of the modern civilization everywhere in the world. In India, the British had acted as the chief agent of this civilization. In a nostalgic mood, he remembered the good old days of his early youth, when people, the educated gentry, used to spend their days and nights, and I quote again, with the stately declamations of Burke, with Macaulay's long rolling sentences, discussions centered upon Shakespeare's drama, Byron poetry, and above all, upon the large-hearted liberalism of 19th century English politics. It was mainly through their mighty literature, Tagore reminded us, we formed our ideas with regard to these newcomers to our Indian shores. The impression of this liberal humanity of the English was so deep that even at the time of national movements, we had not lost faith, and I quote again, we had not lost faith in the generosity of the English race. This impression lingered on the mind of the poet even in his last days, the days of graceless disillusionment. He could never remotely imagine that the great ideals of humanity would end in such ruthless travesty. In many of his early writings too, Tagore was very critical about the selfish, greedy, and ruthless character of the main English, Choto Ingrej, the elements which Tagore equated with the characteristics of the Western nationalism later. But never his tone had been so dejected. In the early writings, a high spirit of hope and optimism and even euphoria used to win over his doubts and anxieties about the future of Western civilization. But this time his dreams were broken, hopes were shattered. and he virtually saw no future in the West. Yet, as an unrepentant humanist, he knew that he should not submit and commit the grievous sin of losing faith in man. And this time he turned to the East, including the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, that is USSR, Soviet Russia, hoping that a new dawn of humanity would come from the far East, from the East, where the sun rises. Except for this last few lines of forced hope, this article sounds almost like an obituary of the Western civilization in anticipation. But for any contemporary student of politics, this tragedy or failure of the British or Western civilization also signifies the tragedy of the project, of the Western project of enlightenment and modernity. Born in the revolutionary age of the late 18th century, when America had just broken the yoke of colonial rule and the French Revolution was knocking at the door, the ideals of enlightenment imbibed the best spirit of humanism established by Renaissance and the Reformation in Europe. Immanuel Kant, the most articulate philosopher of this age, wrote a small essay in a newspaper called What is Enlightenment in 1784, which placed most emphasis on the principles like freedom, reason, and the universalist spirit as the basic premises of the Enlightenment. In the post-French Revolution period, principles of equality, fraternity, freedom, democracy, republicanism, and nationalism became the political slogans of Enlightenment. In short, the Enlightenment carried the message of emancipation to the subjugated nationalities or classes, or the freedom-loving people around the world. But interwoven with this universalist spirit of freedom and rational scientific knowledge was also the universal urge of, and I quote again from another author, a much less lofty, much more mundane, palpably material, and singularly invidious force, unquote, namely capital. And I was quoting from Professor Partho Chatterjee, and he says, from at least the middle of the 18th century for 200 years, reason has traveled the world piggyback, carried across oceans and continents by colonial powers, eager to find new grounds for trade, extraction, and productive expansion of capital. Thus, the success story of the universalist rationalism with capital U and capital R, which upheld the ideals of scientific knowledge and humanist culture throughout the world, was also the colonial tale of success, the success of colonial powers. The former could not be conceived without the latter. And here lies the tragedy of a romantic humanist like Tagore. As one of the best representatives of Bengal Renaissance, which drew its inspiration directly from the Western knowledge and culture, Tagore thought of Western civilization as the embodiment of knowledge and culture, which according to him were positive qualities of a civilization, and sought to overlook or underestimate its nasty side, the ugly face of power. The power which, in connivance with the latest knowledge, both scientific and cultural, is now set to globalize its dominance, especially in this post-colonial, post-Cold War world. But it is not only a case of an old romantic's regrets and disillusions, nor it is a question of criticism from the post-colonial, postmodern camp. Even a profound sympathizer of the Enlightenment modernity project of the recent times, Jürgen Habermas, sounds very feeble and even hesitant in his attempt to defend the noble goals of Enlightenment in today's world when he argues, should we try to hold on the intentions of the Enlightenment, feeble as they may be, or should we declare the entire project of humanity, modernity a lost case. Tagore too, in the devastating early 1940s, could not abandon these intentions, the emancipatory humanist objectives, but he surely declared that the future of the West as the bearer of the flag of enlightenment to be a lost case. But again, the disciples of Edward Said would perhaps point out that Tagore's notion of modernity cannot be fully equated with the Western modernity, as he received and developed this notion as a colonial subject in a world of hybridity, where the basic teachings and values of enlightenment were being used to establish an autonomous space of the Oriental or Indian modernity, which simultaneously accepted and rejected many principles of both the Western modernity and Indian traditions, and juxtaposed them as a special form of modernity, which although privileged Western knowledge, but also bore a sense of pride for the ancient Indian culture and splendor that itself, according to Said, was a partial construction of Western Orientalists. Partho Chatterjee calls this modernity as our modernity, amader adhunikata, that is modernity with a difference. This ambivalent nature of this modernity produced a kind of tension, a kind of dilemma, even a kind of criticality in the minds and actions of its leading recipients, and Tagore was one of them. Thus, when he lost faith in the ability of the West to bear further the flag of universal humanity, the unfinished task of enlightenment, he longed for a new beginning of human emancipation led by the East. Whether such hope was another euphoric utopia, whether the universalistic notion of rational knowledge can also be possible without the universalist power, are outside the preview of this lecture. But at this point, I am tempted to refer to a brilliant little essay by Professor Ranobir Somadar, which sees the whole issue from a different perspective. Somadar, a critic of the prevalent cultural studies of nationalism, observes two recurrent strains, one of dissolution and secondly of farewell in Tagore's Last Testament, and distinguishes between the nationalist and the anti-colonial thinking. While nationalist thinking addresses national constituencies, anti-colonial thinking has no such targeted audience. It is self-critical, that is to say, critical of nationalism. The crisis in civilization, Somadar argues, belongs to this tradition of anti-colonial thinking, which projects another universal, and I quote, mythical, utopian, shorn of historical evils, accommodative, dialogic, sympathetic. These are the virtues that Tagore associates with the one who will come from the East, from the Hon'bles, whose advent is awaited by mother who is in extreme anguish at the way humanity is behaving. Somadar doesn't mind whether the above hope is dream or utopia. He rather valorizes dreams and utopias as the basis of hope and resistance, and holds, and I quote, there has been hardly any other way in the colonial world to counter the reality of power than becoming utopian in political thinking. Thus, in his view, Tagore's essay is an instance of how the colonized has shown at times astonishing capacity to make transition from realistic criticisms to utopia double up as the criticism and become thereby the most volatile critic. If one cares to see the crisis of civilization, this short essay from the above viewpoint, then the whole site of the essay becomes a site of hope and resistance, a site of a new politics of alternative universal, free from the nationalist play of power. Friends, I would stop at this point. Thank you very much for your kind patience. And without much ado, may I declare that today's webinar is open. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you, sir, for your elaboration about the Tagore works and highlighting the different parts of Tagore works. Thank you very much. Now, Devobrata, where is Devobrata?
Yes, sir. We now move to the plenary session, and for which may I now request Professor Ujjayan Bhattacharya, Chairperson, Webinar Subcommittee, Vidyasagar University, to introduce the chairperson and the speaker of the session. So, Professor Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Gautam. To begin the technical session of today's webinar, I invite Dr. Bashabi Fraser, CBE, Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing, Director, Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies, Edinburgh, Napier University. She is an Honorary Fellow, Centre for South Asian Studies, University of Edinburgh, Honorary Fellow, Association of Literary Studies, Scotland, Royal Literary Fund Fellow. The session at which she will be speaking will be chaired by Dr. Inaugural Acharya. It's a pleasure for me to introduce my colleague, Dr. Inaugural Acharya, who is Professor and former Head of the Department of English, Vidyasagar University. Dr. Acharya is the author of the monograph, Beyond the Sense of Belonging, Race, Class and Gender in the Poetry of Yeats and Eliot, published in 2011. He has also edited and translated many books in English and Bengali with specific focus on Dalit literature and language. Some of his new books are in the press. He is also the chief editor of Janajati Darpan, the only international multilingual publication series from Bengal on indigenous studies. Dr. Acharya has presented many research papers in the United States of America and the United Kingdom. He had also been a visiting professor to the Department of English, University of Delhi in 2019-20 academic session. He completed 2 UGC projects as principal investigator on Australian and Indian indigenous traditions in 2008 and 2015 respectively. Dr. Acharya had been the deputy coordinator of the UGC SAP program in the Department of English of our university and the state coordinator of the People's Linguistic Survey of India since 2019. He worked on the documentation and translation of the oral and folk literature of Dalit and tribal communities in West Bengal. Dr. Acharya has also completed 1 UGC innovative research project in 2017 on the endangered tribal languages of South Bengal district. I now invite Professor Inaugural Acharya to chair the session and introduce the main speaker of today's webinar.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for your very kind introduction. I'm really thankful to our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, and the webinar subcommittee for the celebration of 75 years of Indian independence for giving me this opportunity to chair this webinar session, a very special lecture session where all of us are eagerly waiting for the lecture of Professor Bashabi Fraser. And I'm also very delighted to find here many Tagore scholars from India and abroad who have joined us for Professor Fraser's talk. And that adds to the pride and honor of our university. In fact, all of us in our university fraternity are really, really very glad to have all of you with us. Thank you. Let me now introduce formally our speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Bashabi Fraser, CBE, Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing, and Director of Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies, Edinburgh, Napier University, Honorary Fellow at the Centre for South Asian Studies at the University of Edinburgh, and Honorary Fellow of the Association of Literary Studies, Scotland, and an Associate Royal Literary Fund Fellow. She is the Chief Editor of the academic and creative peer-reviewed international e-journal, Gitanjali and Beyond. Her work traverses continents in bridge-building literary projects. She has authored and edited 23 books, published several articles and chapters, both academic and creative, and as a poet has been widely anthologized. She has 5 books in press now, which will be published this year. Her research interests cover post-colonial literature and theory, Tagore studies, migration and diaspora, transnationalism and transculturalism in a postmodern world, personal narratives and oral history, literary theory, and creative practice. Bashabi is an award-winning poet, children's writer, editor, translator, and academic. She is the recipient of a CBE 2021 Queen's New Year Honours for education, culture, and cultural integration. She has been declared Outstanding Woman of Scotland by Saltire Society in 2015. Her other recent awards include Kavi Salam from Poetry Paradigm and Voice of the Republic in India in 2019, the Word Masala Foundation Award for Excellence in Poetry in 2017, special felicitation as a poet on International Women's Day by Public Relations Society of India, March 2017, Rabindra Bharati Society Honor 2014, Women Empowered Arts and Culture Award in 2010, and the AIO Prize for Literary Services in Scotland in 2009. Her recent publications include Patient Dignity 2021, Rabindranath Tagore, A Critical Biography 2019, The Ramayana, a stage play and a screenplay 2019, My Mom's Sari 2019, The Homing Bird 2019, and Letters to My Mother and Other Mothers 2015. Bashabi is the Honorary Vice President of the Association of Scottish Literary Studies, an Executive Committee member of Scottish PAIN, Poetry Association of Scotland, and Writers at Risk Committee Scotland, Director on the board of the Patrick Geddes Trust, a trustee of the Kolkata Scottish Heritage Trust, Ambassador for the Federation of Writers Scotland. She is the President of the Advisory Board of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library in Kolkata, and its Chief Emerita is on the Advisory Board of the V&A Museum in Dundee and the Indian Association of Scottish Studies. Bashabi is on the editorial board of several international peer-reviewed journals and has been an adjudicator for several national and international creative writing competitions. Right now, she is on the panel of judges for the Kabir Prize, a new literary prize in Scotland. She lives and writes in Edinburgh, and she is also Professor Emerita of Scottish Studies at Bankura University. So now it's over to Bashabi. We eagerly look forward to her talk today. And the topic of her lecture is Rabindranath Tagore, the legend and the legacy, which also happens to be the topic of today's webinar. Now the floor is yours, Bashabi. Over to you. Please unmute yourself.
No,
yes.
As you can see, I belong to a certain generation and I'm not really very good with technology. Thank you very much, Professor Indranil Acharya, for that lovely introduction, very generous. I would also like to thank Ujjain Professor Ujjain Bhattacharya for his introduction, and the Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Basu, for his enlightening talk, really enlightening talk on Rabindranath, and for bringing in the crisis of civilization. I would like to thank Vidyasagar University for inviting me to deliver this lecture in this very special year when we celebrate the 75th anniversary of Indian independence. I feel both privileged and honored to be able to speak at a university named after Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, a leading educationist, socio-cultural reformer and philanthropist who led India into the modern era with Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Rabindranath's grandfather, Nationalism, Tagore, amongst others. My special thanks today goes to Dr. Jolly Das, Professor of English, who first approached me to deliver this lecture. Thank you also to the Honorable Vice-Chancellor for inaugurating this series. I am very grateful and pleased to see a lot of my friends today. I can see some of them. I can't see everybody, but I can see my classmate Shomdatta, my much valued friend Fokrul, and Pinaki and Dipanita, but I can't see everybody else. If I don't mention you, please forgive me. But I know if I go to the participants, I can see your names, but I won't do that right now. So thank you for coming. My fellow colleagues at Vidyasagar University and elsewhere, my student friends and ladies and gentlemen. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of India's freedom from colonial rule, we cannot but recall and commemorate our debt to Rabindranath Tagore as a nation builder. He was, as Ashish Nondi points out, our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's intellectual guru, while Gandhiji was his political guru. While Rabindranath remained a subject nation, he signified a fortress of dignity for his countrymen. And we must remember he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in November 13 as the subject of a subject nation, and was the first non-Westerner to be given the prize, making the prize truly international as it reached beyond Europe and America for the first time, honoring and recognizing an Asian man of letters. While Gandhiji witnessed the tragedy of Indian independence being won at the cost of partition, Rabindranath was spared the pain of seeing India and his beloved Bengal divided. He would have been saddened to see that his country had not been awakened into that heaven of freedom that he envisaged for her then and would really welcome now. As we look at the 80 years that Rabindranath lived through, we marvel at his colossal achievement, the legacy that we inherit, and the legend that he has become in subsequent years. In this lecture, it is not possible to do full justice or cover all the themes that are related to the subject of today's lecture. But I would still like to look at Rabindranath's legacy, which embodies our debt to him today. And I will also look at his legendary status as a Renaissance man. As we look at the 80 years, in his time, Rabindranath was simply known as the poet, both nationally and globally, which I speak about in my biography, Rabindranath Tagore, and in my book, A Meeting of Two Minds. If we look at letters from different intellectuals in his time, we find many addressing him as simply dear poet, or referring to him as the poet. Book titles like Kobi or Rani, translated and edited by Shomdatta Mondal, 2020, The Mahatma and the Poet by Shobushachi Bhattacharya, 1997, and a book with a very similar title, The Poet and the Mahatma by Sibaji Pratim Basu, 2009, or Poet and Ploughman by Leonard K. Elmhurst, all testify to Rabindranath being recognized as the international poet that he was. But as we all know, the poet was a polymath, a novelist, a short story writer, a playwright, an autobiographer, a letter writer, an essayist, a lyricist, a composer, a children's writer, an artist, a sermon and travelogue writer. He was also a performing artist, a singer of his own songs, a reciter of his own poems, and a performer in his own plays and dance dramas. He was an artistic innovator who created his distinctive brand of songs, which we all know as Rabindra Sangeet, and his own form of dance, the expressive Rabindranath, which have allowed professionals to specialize in these forms to this day. This was his legacy. I know I'm speaking to an audience which is very familiar with Rabindranath, so I know I am talking to the converted, but maybe we will still be able to look at some aspects and offer some interpretations of Tagore that you might accept today as something that you will carry back with you. What is striking is not just the vast oeuvre of his work, but its depth and quality. As Mohit Kumar Roy says in his preface to his 2-volume anthology of essays on Tagore, whatever he touched turned into gold. So actually he had the Midas touch. As a multi-genre expert, Rabindranath also wrote letters, thousands as we know, scholarly and discursive articles on diverse subjects, science tracts, and primers like the Shohaj Path. In fact, he was the only Nobel laureate to have done so. He founded and developed institutions and was thus an educationalist, a rural reconstructionist, an environmentalist, one who established cooperatives and was, in short, as I said earlier, a nation builder. And above all, a deep humanist, which Professor Basu has pointed out, a man certainly for all times. Yet he was a traveler too, having taken on the task of being on a one-man mission of a cultural ambassador, striving to bring the East and West closer, creating universal understanding by promoting mutual respect and understanding. What Tagore wrote in his 80 years is a vast body of work, which is not always possible for any one person to read in a lifetime, as well as analyze and interpret the entire body of his work. And yet it was one man who did this. If he was not so close to us in time, people might have thought that this body of work could not have been written and accomplished by one man. They would have believed that, like Rembrandt, he probably had a whole school of artists, and in Rabindranath's case, scribes to write in his name. The fact that he found time to build institutions, write creative genres, travel, to connect with Indians across his own country and across the globe, give lectures, write scholarly articles on diverse subjects, science tracts, educational texts, and implement his vision through his multiple pragmatic projects make him the true Renaissance man, which Professor Basu has also spoken about, and the myriad-minded man whom Dr. and Robinson celebrate in their 1996 biography, a term, as we know, Coleridge applied to Shakespeare, another Renaissance man, whom Rabindranath respected a lot. About Rabindranath Tagore, William Raditya has written, he wrote so much, he did so much, he created so much, he was truly global, and we have already heard about his internationalism. Rabindranath's output was phenomenal. In any reassessment of Rabindranath's contribution to nation building in India and his cultural ambassadorial role in facilitating cooperation between the East and West, the consideration of his upbringing and his familial influences in times when Bengal/India was witnessing an awakening, and his own national and international encounters and friendships become relevant for a full understanding of the Renaissance man. In his time, Rabindranath was the voice of India's conscience, and political leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, in spite of their differences, revered the poet's position and sought his approval and blessings. The Nobel Prize for Literature saw Rabindranath thrown onto the world stage, leading to many invitations to give lectures and talks and to meetings in different countries with leading intellectuals and artists and political leaders across the globe. And Rabindranath consciously chose to write his essays and lectures from now on in English, as well as in Bangla, but while addressing an international audience in English, pushing beyond political boundaries and borders of the mind. His own institutions at Shantiniketan, the school established in 1901, as we know, the university in 1921, Vishwabharati, Sriniketan in 1922, to build a nest where the world could meet. The nest, as we know, was a metaphor for intellectual and cultural exchange and cooperation. The hospitality that Rabindranath offered in the Indian tradition to the scholar and artist from elsewhere, the legacy of his generous spirit that we have till very recently experienced in Shantiniketan, where contemporary scholars and artists follow in the footsteps of former scholars, recent inhabitants, in a way, of Shantiniketan from elsewhere, like Jean Openshaw, Martin Clampton, Imre Bange, Sally Jacket, Simon Thacker, who have actually followed the international seekers of knowledge and practitioners of art who were invited and welcomed when Rabindranath lived and worked there, making it an international nest for exchange and interaction. This paper will thus try to assess Rabindranath's legacy and the legend that he has become since his time. Tagore was born, as we know, in 1861, 3 years after the Indian Revolt in 1857, and after the Crown had taken over the governance of India in 1858. Sorry, I should say 4 years after 1857. He says the year of his birth was an unimportant one, with his characteristic modesty. But he concedes that he was born into a family, and I quote him, remarkable at a great period in our history in Bengal, the Renaissance. His birthplace, Jorashako, which we know as Thakurbari in Calcutta, was the epicenter of the Bengal Renaissance. I quote Rabindranath again from A Poet's School. My ancestors came floating to Calcutta upon the earliest tide of the fluctuating fortunes of the East India Company. The conventional code of life for our family thereupon became a confluence of three cultures, the Hindu, Mohammedan, and the British. This was a cultural reference, not a religious one. The metaphor of a confluence recurs again as he describes his upbringing. I quote, I was born and brought up in an atmosphere of confluence of three movements. And these are religious, literary, and social. And he goes on to say, all of which were revolutionary. And we must remember this word, revolutionary, in relation to Rabindranath. I was born in a family which had to live its own life, which led me from my young days to seek guidance for my own self-expression in my own inner standard of judgment. And as we know, and I'm not going to go into this because you all know that the Tagore family as Pirali Brahmins were quite marginalized and had to make their own way and their own position in society, which they did rather well. So what has Rabindranath left for us as his legacy, which is both rich and diverse? Rabindranath was an innovator and inventor, a refiner and creator. His days spent in supervising and improving the lives of people on his family estates at Chilaidaho, Potishar, Kaligram, Shahjatpur, Birahimpur made him a witness to the sense of desolation and lethargy apparent in Bengal's villages. This is where he started his rural resuscitation projects, building cooperatives to encourage self-dependence and self-reliance and bring back hope, that spark of hope which we all need in his countrymen. The initiative of a true nation builder. However small the beginnings and however localized, this could become a beacon for the rest of India. The Chilaidaho experience rooted Rabindranath in a deeper understanding of his nation and her people, and his first-hand witness bore fruit in his Choto Golpo, the short stories that he introduced to Bangla literature, gathered in Golpo Gucho, which depicted ordinary lives in moving narratives using conversational Bengali, a transition from Shadhu Bhasha to Cholit Bhasha, a modern innovation, another of his legacies. He had already used Cholit Bhasha in his letters and as he would carry on doing in his travelogues, but the Choto Golpo is a watershed, in my opinion. When the Swadeshi movement erupted with the announcement of Lord Curzon of the first partition of Bengal in 1905, Rabindranath not only led the protesting demonstrators singing his own songs, but in the spate of nationalist fervor, he wrote 23 patriotic songs in this period, singing Bengal into a nation, as Ezra Pound would say. A legacy of moving melodies whose words continue to inspire love of the motherland today. And his vast repertoire of 2,200 Rabindra Sangit or more has left us songs for every mood, every emotion, every occasion, every season that human society requires and can identify with. Bengal was, as we know, was reunited in 1911 to be divided again in 1947. His legacy is also in the two anthems of India and Bangladesh, and he inspired another national anthem in Sri Lanka. He wrote sonnets, free verse, epics, poetic dialogues, and used rhyme as an expert wordsmith. In his own translations of the English Gitanjali in 1912, Rabindranath introduced the prose poem, which he continued to write in Bengali in collections like Lipika. He was inspired by Japanese haiku and tanka, and he wrote pithy, captivating short verse, and he coined the word kobitika for that, a word I love. And we can see that these in Konika, Lekon, Spulingo, another innovation in Bengali poetry, which have been translated into Stray Birds 1916 and Fireflies 1928. He was active in the debates around modernity, and Professor Basu has also spoken about his modernity and modernism in Bengal, initiating the contemporary public debates on Adhunikota, modernism, with his essay Shahitya Dharma. And there were many essays in between that went back and forth between the contestants in this debate, led by Rabindranath, again, we have the lead poet clinching the debate with Shahitya Nabutto, affirming the validity of one's local experience as more valid than borrowing trends from elsewhere. He pointed out that experiences in Europe required possibly the Baudelairean response in modernism in the West, which did not mirror the situation of colonial subservience and the rising waves of nationalism in India, and was thus not the right vehicle or approach for Indian expression. As John Shanal has rightly said, Rabindranath, like the true modern that he was willing to reinvent himself at 70 to adapt to and represent the times, arousing a grudging respect and acceptance as the reigning master poet in Sheshir Kobita by the poets of the Kollal group who practiced the Kolorobe Shahitya. He thus established his unassailable modernity, defeating the tide of Robindra Virodhita, resistance to Tagore, probably quite decisively. And he left the legacy of his poetry that continues to have the appeal of being always relevant and hence truly modern. His legacy lies beyond his stylistic and genre innovations, in his political philosophy, which he promulgated in discursive essays and creative compositions. In Rabindranath, we witness, and I use the metaphor again, a confluence of the past and the present, of a knowledge of history and tradition, and an espousal of modernity and progress, of the spiritual and the pragmatic, of the East and the West, of home and the world. But coming as he did from a family which had challenged orthodoxy, questioned ritual worship, turned away from idolatry, revolutionized literature, and challenged sociocultural norms, he would remain a radical at various levels. And Shangyukta Dashgupta has edited a volume of critical essays entitled Radical Rabindranath. So watch that space. He often went against the grain of popular beliefs and trends, and what was considered acceptable, and was thus isolated, often a lonely voice, misunderstood both at home and abroad. As such, he had to turn to his inner sense of truth and justice, of what was good for the nation at large, for its future, and for its place and relationship in the world and with the world. The warning against the dangers of narrow nationalism, which have also been covered by Professor Basu, is a nationalism which easily slides into fascism and have been gathered in Tagore's collection, Nationalism, in 1917. And he was right, because we have witnessed what happened very recently, the Bosnian genocide, and we also know about the Holocaust during the Second World War. He makes a distinction between the oppressive and coercive machines of the state, the nation with a capital N, against the inclusive and sustaining interdependent nature of nations with a small n, the Samaj, which can be loosely translated as society or the community. The warning signals had come earlier during the Swadeshi movement, when Rabindranath had been alarmed by the divisive politics based on religion that tore through Bengal, and he saw the danger of a conflagration sweeping through the province, set alight by the sectarian violence in the name of nationalism. He remained a voice for religious tolerance and cooperation in a country which is signified by an interdependent society composed of multiple groups. This is how his idea of India finds credence, as he recognizes the unity in diversity so crucial to a country like India, where her richness lies in her long history of multiple groups coming to India, settling side by side, making it their home in an association of accommodation and exchange in a society that has to be secular and tolerant to survive and not to unravel. This is also his legacy. Rabindranath identified the creative principle within man, waiting to be realized by every individual. He calls it the surplus in the religion of man. His Hibbert lectures given in Oxford and published in 1931. It is true that the Thakurbari induced a love of freedom, the freedom to create, to express oneself, and urge to free the nation from subjectivity, superstition, and ignorance. This is what he promulgated in both Shantiniketan and Sriniketan, where one could realize one's full potential through creative education, which is holistic, where students like Amartya Sen and Satyajit Ray enjoyed the freedom of being taught outdoors, the classroom without walls, and know the joy of debate and discussion in an unfettered ambience where they could be proud of their traditions, but also respectful of other influences, where they, like many alumni of these two institutions, were free to create and be creative. This spirit of freedom embodied in what Rabindranath described rather modestly as the atmosphere he had created at Shantiniketan, a poribesh conducive to positive growth, which could only be achieved through interdisciplinary learning, was his legacy. Thus, Rabindranath saw the efficacy of making arts integral to learning, as education could be an enjoyable experience through the incorporation of performances, songs, poetry, plays, dance, storytelling, drawing, and painting, making learning holistic and creative, permeating the sciences, social sciences, as well as the humanities. He did not believe in making education exclusionary and elitist, which is why he made his institutions a continuation of their surroundings, reflecting the culture of the place around it in a seamless flow. The students and staff participated in folk festivals, making the education institutions rooted in local traditions, a continuation of the hinterland. At Shantiniketan and Sriniketan, he gave recognition and dignity to the artist and craftsman. I think all of us have at some point or the other picked up a beautiful crafted object and wondered who made it. Because a lot of the time it's not factory made, it's homemade. And yet the name of the craftsman or the artist is not inscribed on it. And this is what Rabindranath did. He gave recognition and dignity to the artist and craftsman. As for example, the kumur, the potter, to the artist and sculptor, to folk art, traditional forms, and contemporary expression at Kolabhava. And his own imaginative paintings and sketches contributed richly to the Bengal School of Modern Art, where an amalgamation of folk traditions merged with Western expressionistic representation in what Tapati Gupta, as an art critic, describes as a dream world of strange creatures and shapes, landscapes of the mind, and suggestive portraits of people at a time when the world was convulsed by militaristic competition and violent nationalism, which disturbed the artist in Rabindranath into action. Rabindranath, with his Thakurbari experience, promoted the woman's entry into the public sphere in Ghore or portrayed the active search for freedom from a position of non-recognition in marriage, as in Street Bothro, depicting women with agency. He composed plays and dance dramas where women had leading roles. Dancers had been denigrated in colonial times as courtesans and devdasis, who were actually court dancers and temple devotees, highly accomplished and classically trained. Rabindranath returned respectability to dance by encouraging Tagore women and girls from respectable middle-class families and his school to perform in public. He sanctified dance as an educational discipline alongside music and song at Shongit Bhavan. And he wrote some of his most powerful dance dramas with strong female characters, Shama, Chandalika, Chitrangoda, raising profound questions through each central character about sin, forgiveness, and redemption. The necessity of giving a regal woman a place by the side of her male counterpart, not to be placed on a pedestal to be worshipped, not to be neglected and left behind, or to be spurned as an untouchable. You know all these characters and the unforgettable lines from these dance dramas, so I won't go into them. But what he did do was give a voice to women as remarkable social icons with agency. These are all his legacies, offering and encouraging the freedom to think, debate, perform, create, and in short, live as one chooses to live without being told what to do, with full respect for and acceptance of other customs and cultures beyond one's own. It is difficult to do full justice, as I have said earlier, to Tagore's multifaceted accomplishments in one lecture. But what has been attempted here is a tribute to a creative genius, a Samaj architect and an internationalist, to whom India and the world owe a great debt. He was, as I have emphasized through this talk, a nation builder and a cultural ambassador, a patriot and a universal man. He has become a legendary figure. And how many times have we not visited tea houses and restaurants which have notices stating Rabindranath ekane eshechilen, had been there, written a few lines of exquisite verse to make that place proverbial and the memory of his visit indelible. There are letters in the possession of private families to this day with his recognizable writing and signature, which are held as sacred, invaluable familial treasures. And there must be many households in handheld folding fans in Japanese households with little aphoristic verse written in Rabindranath's beautiful hand during his visits to Japan. In fact, one man fashioned a nation's writing, both in Bangla and in English, that recognizable hand, beautiful, artistic, and elegant, another legacy. In Kolkata and in Bengal and in Bangladesh, there are educational institutions, buildings, hospitals, streets, parks named after Rabindranath, and many more across India. In India, we have literary prizes named after Rabindranath. I won't give you the list because you just have to go to Wikipedia to find these. There are festivals dedicated to the poet in India and abroad. And we all know that we celebrate Rabindra Jayanti across the world, wherever there are diasporic Bengalis from both Bengal and Bangladesh. And also there is the Tagore Festival in Dartington, held in abeyance for 2 years during the pandemic, but hopefully to be resumed this year. The list of the poet and his legendary status in countries he visited is long, so I won't go into it. I will name just a few here in Europe. There's a Rabindranath Tagore Street in Berlin. Israel named a street after Rabindranath Tagore on his 159th birthday. There's a Tagore Promenade on Lake Balaton in Hungary. There's a statue in Belgrade in Friendship Park in Serbia, which Dipanita has just told me about. And closer to where I live, which is one of my homes, apart from my home in India, is a bust in Gordon Square, Bloomsbury district, where Rabindranath visited and stayed and was part of the Bloomsbury group that was established by the Tagore Centre in London. There's a poem, as we know, to Shakespeare by Rabindranath in the garden of Shakespeare's house. And very recently, last year, in October 2020, Jean Openshaw led and installed the placing of a plaque in Brighton at the school Rabindranath attended when he first came to England in 1878. There are centres dedicated to Tagore studies, and I've just named the Tagore Centre in London. It's Glasgow branch, our Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies. at Napier University. Tagore centers in many countries, for example, in Germany and Mauritius, and Tagore's work is the focus of research at various world institutions. Tagore remains an industry in Bengal, an inspiration in multimedia channels across India, and a harmonizing influence globally if his word is heeded. He is, as I said, a man for all times, and I would add, a man for all seasons, an intellectual and artistic giant who embodies a deep humanism that is both liberating and enhancing. Such human beings come but rarely to this world. And when they do, we are fortunate. But Rabindranath was not distant, but rooted. And he encouraged others to realize their full potential with his characteristic generosity. And we are privileged and grateful that by the chance of fate, he was born in undivided Bengal and wrote in Bangla and reached across India and to the world. He was our unsolicited and perhaps undeserved gift, but we remain grateful that he was with us. He held the fortress of our dignity, as I've said earlier, when we were under colonial rule. And now he continues to stand for everything that brings pride to every Indian, to every Bengali in this year of our 75th anniversary of Indian independence. I will end not with my words, but with the words of Albert Einstein, who wrote to celebrate his friend Rabindranath Tagore's 70th birthday in the Golden Book of Tagore in 1931, which sums up the legacy of the poet and the legend he remains and will continue to be. Thou sawest the fierce strife of creatures, a strife that wells forth from need and dark desire. Thou sawest the escape in calm meditation and in creative beauty. Cherishing these, thou hast served mankind all through a long and fruitful life, spreading everywhere a gentle and a free thought in a manner such as the seers of thy people have proclaimed as the ideal. This was Rabindranath Tagore, the deep humanist whom we still cherish and treasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bashabi Fraser, for this wonderfully illuminating and inclusive talk. It's really a great challenge, to touch upon the myriad facets of Tagore's life and works within a span of barely an hour. And you have done it very commendably. In fact, all of us have been quite delighted to listen to once again to the ideas which all of us have been familiar with, but at the same time which could be compacted within the span of this very illuminating talk. In fact, Dr. Fraser has touched upon all the major facets of Tagore as a nation builder, as a cultural ambassador, and how he has left his legacy in all forms of literature and culture, particularly how he has been the true cultural ambassador of Bengal to the rest of the world. And Dr. Fraser has also touched upon the relationship of this contemporary political thinkers, contemporary of Tagore, and the nationalist leaders like Nehru and Gandhi. And she has also stressed upon Tagore's ability to push the borders of the mind. And she has highlighted Tagore's international connects and the legacies he has left, especially outside India. How he has become both an innovator and inventor, and how his Shilaidaho experience and many other, kinds of experience contributed to the making of the brilliant, anthology of stories, Choto Golpo, and how Cholito Bhasha was given a new lease of life, how it had been his great contribution to the making of modern Bengali prose fiction. Apart from that, she has also touched upon the patriotic songs of Tagore, the very rich oeuvre of songs which Tagore has left for all of us. And I'm also very pleased to listen to some of the major publications from Bengal, which Dr. Fraser has mentioned during her talk. And we are also very happy to find that some of them are with us in today's talk. They were with us, they are still with us. Professor Sangyukta Dasgupta, the author of Radical Rabindranath, and also she has referred to, I think, Professor Jayati Gupta's work, and she has also referred to Professor Tapati Gupta. She is not here, but that is also a major, contribution to Tagore studies. Professor Jharna Sannal and others, and obviously it is also a very great moment of delight for all of us to hear it from Dr. Fraser, the outstanding publication which our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, has made in this domain in connection with Tagore studies. So I'm particularly reminded of one very important, legacy which Tagore has left, particularly when we think of the 150th birth anniversary celebration, which was jointly celebrated by India and Bangladesh. In 2011, we find it was a major landmark. And in the context of Bangladesh, we know how the military leader, Ayub Khan, at one point of time banned Tagore's songs. But actually it happened that the poet only became more relevant than before due to such bans and restrictions. And we know how Tagore was a champion of linguistic nationalism, and how his song inspired Bengalis in the fight against that Pakistan in 1971 War of Liberation. So there are many such instances where we find the legacy of Tagore. He has left his footprints everywhere. সবখানেতেই তার চরণ পাতা রয়েছে। কাজেই রবীন্দ্রনাথ আমাদের স্মরণে, মননে, অনুধ্যানে চিরজাগরুক হয়ে আছেন। Okay, with these few words, I now would like to invite questions and comments from the learned audience. I hope Bashabidi would respond to the questions or comments or suggestions if we have any. So the session is now open for comments or questions or suggestions of any kind.
It has been wonderful listening to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just also add, Professor Acharya, that there are many writers who and scholars on Rabindranath whom I couldn't refer to, but they've done marvelous work. I mean, you mentioned Professor Jayati Gupta. I would like to add Professor Malashri Lal, who has worked on the feminist side. I have already mentioned Somdatta Mondal, whose last days of Rabindranath actually would supplement what Professor Basu said earlier about his, at the period when he wrote Crisis in Civilization. I would also like to add that there are people who wrote on various aspects, written on various aspects, like Anandalal, his plays. The list is long. So forgive me if I couldn't mention everybody, but can I take this opportunity to say how grateful I am for other scholars who have paved the way for all of us and on whose scholarship we all rely and have been enriched by them. And this is what will keep Rabindranath alive, this continuing Gobishona and practice of his work.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Fraser. Professor Somdatta Mondal is with us. Would you like to make any observation or any comment?
No observations at all. I just wrote kudos in the comment box. Praising a friend is not too good. It, people might think that, we are scratching each other's back. But it was excellent, Bashabi, the way you could really, it's so difficult, I know, to combine so many things within an hour. But the way you touched upon, and especially what I really enjoyed, and I didn't know the details, are all the places named after Tagore, especially the recent one, which you said 2020. So this proves that his legacy is still alive and it will continue. This is, in the West, in various places. We knew about a few places, but not all of them. But the way you mentioned it, I was really thrilled to know that even in 2020, people think about, putting up plaques and kind of things, as it is a practice with writers of the West. And this was something I was very much enjoyed. Thank you very much. So no scratching back or patting your back, but it is true, sincere from the heart. It was a very enriching lecture. And it's not possible to cover everything, but you did cover so many aspects in so many. As your I don't know whether the audience here are all aware. A couple of years back, Bashabi brought out a biography of Tagore. And I had reviewed it. And what amazed me was the slim volume of the biography, how it could cover everything, every aspect. And the book is right in front of me. Y'all can see it. Rabindranath Tagore by Bashabi. It is just here. And you see it's a thin volume. But to capture that polymath within these few pages was such a difficult task. And she did such a wonderful job. For those who really want to still, read Tagore and his relevance, I think you should read this book. It is not a specialist book, but one of the very recent and very well done biographies. Thank you very much for giving me, Indranil, to say these few words, but I think it's worth the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Somdatta. And I also find that our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, is also with us. So if Sir would like to comment on Professor Fraser's talk.
No, this has been a very mesmerizing, kind of, and I was thinking that the entire legacy or the legends, everything you have covered, Dr. Fraser, I think it was less than an hour, and you have touched upon everything. And I think for every sentence that you uttered, one seminar can be granted on every sentence, So it's very, very condensed kind of, but at the same time, very lucid. And we enjoyed it, especially, I think, for the, for those who are not that initiated in Tagore's works, they also will enjoy. And we are thinking that, of course, like Professor Mondal and myself, who have worked for long, we can think that this was not touched. But it's impossible. So you have done an impossible work. I thank you so much. And I have read someone, Bashabi, you can enlighten us that I think Richard Barton, the actor, he remembered in one of when he was paying tribute to another actress. I just forgot her name. That you have made me endless. That line. So everywhere, and we can also speak of that poet, Send Off, the written by that young poet who was sent to First World War, and he died. And then his mother wrote to Tagore that I don't know who you are, but I have found Gitanjali beside in his pocket.
Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen, sir. Yeah.
Yes, Wilfred Owen. So such a person, but it is very intriguing that still now Tagore is, because the world has changed. After First World War, Europe has changed. After Second World War, it has changed more, and I think beyond recognition. So even now, if Tagore is being, one thing, Bashabi, I think that his paintings of Tagore, that was very in 1930s. His exhibition were organized in Europe, in many places, but it was very individualistic, different. Although the Bengal art happened in Thakurbari itself, in Dokkiner Baranda, as they say, where these Abanindranath Tagore, Gaganendra Babu, and they were very influenced by Okakura. But Rabindranath, one thing I read one line from, I think, Tapati Guha Thakurata. She is also an art scholar and art historian. That somewhere she wrote, being a vice-chancellor, it's very difficult. I have come to this, lecture from a cricket match was going on just 20 minutes ago when I joined. So there she mentioned that although Tagore went through these experiments of Bengal art, Abanindranath, and which rather tried another zone of experiments other than the formal Western kind of painting. Tagore's painting was absolutely different. When Tagore began his painting and exhibited it in 1930s, it was absolutely a different thing. Only I think some kind of Orientalism was there in his that remained in his poetry, poems like Nagore Noti, Choleo Bhishare, Joubono Mode Motta, that gol kind of things you will find in Orientalism and other things. But she was a fascinating person. Thank you so much for your lecture, and please do come, as I know you are associated with Bankura University, and Bankura has the Scottish missionaries were there, Edward Thompson and others. So you are more closer to Bankura, but please come to Midnapur also, our university. You come, I extend you warm invitation. Please do come, and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
your
very much.
Very illuminating response. And I would also like to announce here that Professor Fakhrul Alam, who had been with us in this talk, would be delivering a very special lecture in this webinar series that will be organized by the Department of English on 18th of February. So Professor Alam will be speaking on Tagore and translation studies. So it will be on 18th in the evening at 7 p.m. We also have with us, we had with us Professor Sangjukta Dasgupta, another very noted Tagore scholar. And Bashabi Di has also referred to Sangjukta Di's work. So I would request Sangjukta Di to respond to Bashabi Di's talk. If Sangjukta Di would like to say a few words.
I think I just posted that it is a very comprehensive and concise presentation and brilliant as usual. And Bashabi, of course, has been very close to me because both of us have to write poetry, and that brings us very close to each other. And Tagore has always been an inspiration that made us feel that probably we also need to share with the world whatever we are thinking. And of course, the talk was very comprehensive, and Bashabi looked at all the signposts, all the milestones that define Tagore, define Tagorean studies in the 21st century. And I have just two observations. One is that we need not only look at the printed texts, we need to look at the visual texts as well. That is the films, the documentaries, because these are important because nowadays, if you look at us and if you look at the very young people, many of us have these bookshelves behind us, but the young people have it all in the palm of their hand. That is the Kindle, if they read at all, because they prefer to see pictures more. And so I think in the 21st century, Tagore, of course, is somebody who is never dated. It's absolutely timeless, and Tagore has contributed in a way globally and locally in making us feel that the very essence of what all of us want to do is to hold our heads high and have a mind free of fear. And that is what has been the principal inspiration of Tagore, even today in the 21st century. And so Bashabi has been able to tell us all about not just Tagore, but about his times, about the colonial period, and about the almost rebirth of Tagore after he was awarded the Nobel Prize, because that was a very new Tagore. Post-Nobel Tagore is, if you want to define his contribution after that, it is a more resolute, more confident Tagore than the earlier Tagore, that is the pre-1913. And Bashabi has pointed out these features very well. I wish Bashabi had also referred to how he has also, for us who deal with gender studies, we look upon Tagore as the first feminist of Bengali culture. So, but yes, it's been a fascinating presentation, and I look forward to more of these sessions. And Fakhrul, I believe, is going to give another talk very soon on Tagore and translation. And what is translation but to convey what we are feeling? So whatever I've been thinking, I've been able to translate in words, I hope, successfully or otherwise. And so congratulations again, Bashabi. This is fantastic. And also I must congratulate Vidyasagar University, Indranil, and all the others, and my friend Somdatta, who probably will send me another huge book of 900 pages soon on Tagore. Because Somdatta is just brilliant. I don't know how she manages this work, but she has been also, and she also knows how lazy I am. So she keeps on telling me that I'm sending you another book, and she makes me read. And so I also learn. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Indranil. And congratulations, Bashabi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I? Thank you very much, Sangjukta.
Yes, Bashabi.
Thank you, Indranil. Just to say thank you very much for your warm words. I did comment on his bringing the woman out, both in his work and in the written work, in performances, and in the way he presented women and encouraged their participation. So I know it's the tip of the iceberg, but I leave it to feminist scholars like you and Malashri to do more in that area. I also want to thank Professor Basu and accept his invitation to come to Vidyasagar. It will be a pleasure, true pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indranil, can I just add one word?
Yes, please.
With the long list of introduction of the achievements of Bashabi, I think one thing has to be mentioned to the audience here. For all of you who have not seen it, please visit Bashabi's edited journal, Gitanjali and Beyond. So it is available online. So what a wonderful editing she is doing. She is the managing editor of Gitanjali and Beyond, this journal. So for those of you who have not seen what it is like, I just recommend that you find out some time and see how she has managed to launch a new journal only on Tagore and Gitanjali and Beyond in this 21st century, when people think that Tagore is that old man who has nothing new to add. So with these words, I think they did mention about your editorial thing, but it needs special mention for those who have not seen what work. And she brings out regularly. I think with the pandemic, a couple of issues got a bit delayed. It is supposed to come out twice a year. Am I correct, Bashabi?
Yeah, you were right. You are right, Shomdatta. It was delayed a little.
Yes,
and
that's understood. For these last 2 years, the world has turned topsy-turvy, but I assume it's a spring issue is coming out again very soon.
Yes.
And we all look forward to, please read the new issue of Gitanjali and Beyond.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you,
annual one now, Shom, because everybody, all the associate editors wanted it to be annual. So we will do one issue a year.
Yes.
I hope that's all right. And thank you for mentioning it, because we have tremendously rich contributions in Gitanjali and Beyond. And it's both academic and creative. Just Tagore would have liked it. So thanks, Shomdatta, for mentioning it.
Okay.
Hello.
Dipannita Dotto has raised a hand. Would you please?
Yes.
No?
I just want. Hello.
Yes.
I just wanted to tell all of you, and of course, Bashabi, it was a brilliant lecture, of course. There's nothing more to say about it. But what I wanted to tell is regarding the Serbia part, which Bashabi did mention. This was a recent event, if I can say. Tagore actually stands tall in Serbia, and the monument which has been built in his name bears the poem "Where the Mind is Without Fear." So I think it is helping internationally, the poem. And another thing that I would like to mention is the heaven of freedom. That is something we really crave for, and it's there in Serbia and in us. So I think Bashabi is perfectly right when she said that she was struggling to see his country awaken to that freedom, and about which I have written. Hopefully it will get published in Gitanjali and Beyond. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I hope we don't have any more questions or comments or observations. And once again, I would like to thank Bashabi for this very stimulating talk. And we have, so many, Tagore scholars assembled here. And our university is, thankful to all of you and to each one of you, for your presence and active participation. I now conclude this plenary session. Thank you. Thank you all.
May I now request Professor Ramakrishna Maiti, Department of Geography, Vidyasagar University, to propose the vote of thanks. Professor Maiti.
Respected Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Sir, Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, today's speaker, Professor Bashabi Fraser, my colleagues from India and abroad, scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose formal vote of thanks on this occasion of third lecture in the series of webinars to celebrate 75th year of independence. I, on behalf of organizing committee and on my personal behalf, extend sincere thanks to Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu for his inaugurating speech. He efficiently fixed the tune of today's lecture. He built the foundation and set the perspectives of today's discussion. Indeed, he made us easy to follow all the proceedings that we have experienced today. Actually, this lecture series is originally framed by him, and the organizing committee of this seminar series really is thankful to him for his constant support and valuable advice. On behalf of Vidyasagar University fraternity, I extend hearty thanks to today's speaker, Professor Bashabi Fraser, Director, Scottish Centre for Tagore Studies, Edinburgh, Napier University, for accepting our invitation and for sharing her valuable views and thoughts, findings, and her opinions on varied aspects of Rabindranath Tagore. With deep sense of appreciation, we thank to the technical team, Dr. Debabrata Modak for anchoring this program, to Professor Indranil Acharya for presiding this lecture, and all the dignitaries and scholars who graced this lecture today, especially Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, Professor Jharna Sannal, Professor Farooq Alam, and many more. In this connection, I like to acknowledge the contribution of those who worked hard to make this program successful. At last, and not the least, I like to extend our sincere thanks to all the audiences for staying with us for over 2 hours in this online mode to make this program successful. So thank you very much. Debabrata, please.
Thank you, Bashabidi. Thank you, Ramakrishna, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kindly please declare that this webinar is over. It's a formal thing. You have not, nobody has declared it. Either Jolidi, you should.
Yes, I have just switched my video on. Yes, sir. Gratitude to everyone once again. This webinar is over. Thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you.